The Caribbean Sea has long been a stage for geopolitical maneuvering, but in recent years it has increasingly become a theater where Venezuela and the United States lock eyes across the horizon, their naval forces occasionally brushing too close for comfort. For the United States Navy, deploying destroyers to the waters near Venezuela is not simply an exercise in power projection, it is a statement of presence, a reminder of America's reach, and a way of assuring allies in the hemisphere that Washington still holds sway over maritime security in its own backyard. For Venezuela, however, these deployments carry a very different meaning. They are seen as provocations, as incursions meant to intimidate, and as symbols of the broader economic and political struggle that Caracas has been fighting against Washington for more than 2 decades. To understand the tensions between Venezuela and U.S. Navy destroyers is to understand the deep currents of geopolitics, economics, and national pride that define the modern era in the Western Hemisphere. The roots of this naval standoff go back to the rise of Hugo Chavez in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when Venezuela took a strong anti-American stance, challenging Washington's dominance in Latin America. Chavez cultivated ties with powers like Russia, China, and Iran, and used Venezuela's vast oil wealth to promote his own vision of a multipolar world. For the United States, this was a direct challenge not only to its influence in the region but also to the idea that Latin America should remain within Washington's sphere of influence. When Nicolas Maduro succeeded Chavez, relations deteriorated further, especially after the Venezuelan economy collapsed under hyperinflation, corruption, and international sanctions. The United States declared Maduro's presidency illegitimate and recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the rightful president, further straining relations. Against this backdrop, the deployment of U.S. Navy destroyers off the Venezuelan coast becomes more than a routine mission, it becomes a symbolic clash between two very different visions of power and sovereignty. U.S. Navy destroyers, especially the Arli Bёrk class, represent some of the most advanced and powerful warships in the world. Bristling with Aegis combat systems, vertical launch missile cells, advanced radar, and anti-submarine warfare capabilities, these ships are floating fortresses designed to control vast stretches of sea. When one or more of these vessels appear near Venezuela, it sends an unmistakable message. The message is that the United States retains the ability to enforce maritime security, interdict illegal smuggling, and if necessary, conduct precision strikes from the sea. For American audiences, these destroyers embody the essence of naval power projection, a reminder of the freedom of navigation that underpins global trade, and the reassurance that hostile regimes cannot threaten America's neighbors without consequences. Venezuela's navy, by contrast, is far smaller and far less advanced. It consists of a handful of aging frigates, some patrol vessels, and a limited submarine force that is often more symbolic than operational. Maintenance has long been an issue, and years of economic turmoil have left much of the fleet underfunded and under-equipped. Still, for Caracas, the sight of American destroyers so close to its waters is an affront to sovereignty, a reminder of what they see as imperial arrogance. Venezuelan officials frequently denounce these U.S. deployments as acts of intimidation, claiming that they violate international norms and are intended to destabilize the government. To the average Venezuelan, already struggling with shortages and political unrest, the sight of American warships offshore is a bitter pill that reinforces a sense of encirclement and vulnerability. From the American perspective, however, these deployments are not about provoking Venezuela but about ensuring stability in a region rife with drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and authoritarian regimes that have grown closer to U.S. rivals like Russia and Iran. Over the past decade, the Caribbean and Latin America have seen an increasing presence of Russian military advisors, Chinese economic investments, and even Iranian oil shipments defying U.S. sanctions. By sending destroyers to patrol the Caribbean, the United States not only pressures Venezuela but also sends a broader signal to Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran that Washington is still the dominant force in the hemisphere. For U.S. audiences, these naval patrols resonate as a defense of American values and security, ensuring that hostile powers cannot gain a foothold so close to American shores. The clash between Venezuela and U.S. Navy destroyers is not likely to erupt into full-scale war, but it carries the constant risk of miscalculation. Naval encounters are inherently risky, and the possibility of an accidental collision, a warning shot gone wrong, or a sudden escalation always looms. For Venezuela, confronting an American destroyer directly would be suicidal, but the temptation to stage a show of force for domestic political gain remains ever present. A Venezuelan patrol boat shadowing an American destroyer, a jet buzzing too close to a U.S. ship, or a warning broadcast over the radio can quickly escalate into a headline-grabbing incident. In such a scenario, American audiences would be reminded not only of the volatility of the Caribbean but also of the fragility of peace when two adversaries face off at sea. The larger question is why Venezuela continues to provoke or resist when the balance of power is so heavily stacked against it. The answer lies in politics, pride, and survival. For Nicolas Maduro, maintaining an image of resistance against the United States is essential for domestic legitimacy. Portraying the U.S. as an aggressor allows him to rally nationalist sentiment and distract from the country's economic collapse. For the United States, maintaining a strong naval presence is about ensuring that Venezuela does not become a staging ground for America's adversaries. In a world where Russia is seeking to expand its global footprint, where China is expanding its influence through trade and investment, and where Iran has already forged ties with Caracas, Washington cannot afford to appear weak. For American audiences, the standoff is a reminder of the enduring role of the U.S. Navy as the ultimate guarantor of maritime security. The Navy's destroyers are not only symbols of technological superiority but also of America's willingness to act. In a time when global threats are diversifying, from cyber warfare to terrorism to great power competition, the image of a destroyer cutting through Caribbean waters provides reassurance that the United States still commands the seas. The average American may not follow the details of Venezuelan politics, but the sight of the stars and stripes flying over the deck of a destroyer resonates deeply as a symbol of freedom, security, and deterrence. The dynamic between Venezuela and the U.S. Navy also underscores the changing nature of geopolitics in the 21st century. Unlike the Cold War, when battles were clearly defined between superpowers, today's conflicts are murkier, involving a mix of economic sanctions, cyber operations, disinformation campaigns, and shows of military force that stop short of actual war. The presence of U.S. Navy destroyers off Venezuela's coast is not about launching missiles but about shaping perceptions, signaling resolve, and deterring adversaries. For an American audience, this reflects a familiar but evolving narrative, that of America as the global policeman, sometimes resented but always indispensable. At the same time, the U.S. deployment of destroyers in the Caribbean highlights the tension between international law and power politics. Washington argues that its ships are operating in international waters, conducting lawful missions to protect regional security. Caracas insists that these missions violate its sovereignty and represent a threat of invasion. International observers, meanwhile, see the situation as part of a broader struggle between authoritarian regimes and democratic powers. For American viewers, this debate reinforces the notion that the United States stands on the side of freedom and law, while regimes like Maduro's represent corruption, repression, and defiance of the international community. The Venezuelan government has tried to counter U.S. naval deployments with its own alliances, inviting Russian bombers to land in the country, purchasing military equipment from Moscow and Beijing, and striking deals with Tehran to secure fuel shipments. These moves are meant to show that Venezuela is not isolated, that it has powerful friends willing to defy Washington. But for the United States, such gestures only reinforce the need to maintain a strong naval presence. The prospect of Russian or Iranian forces gaining a foothold so close to U.S. territory is unacceptable, and the deployment of destroyers is a way of drawing a clear red line. For American audiences, the situation can evoke echoes of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Soviet missiles in Cuba brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. While today's standoff is far less dangerous, the parallels are striking. Once again, a small Caribbean nation aligned with America's rivals is challenging U.S. dominance in its own hemisphere. Once again, the U.S. Navy is at the forefront of enforcing deterrence. The difference is that today, the tools of confrontation are subtler, involving patrols, blockades, and shows of force rather than the deployment of nuclear missiles. Still, the psychological impact is significant, reminding Americans of the enduring importance of vigilance and readiness. The Venezuelan crisis is also tied to broader issues of energy security and global markets. Venezuela once boasted the largest proven oil reserves in the world, and while its production has collapsed in recent years, the potential for future recovery remains. For the United States, ensuring that such resources are not controlled by hostile regimes or exploited by rivals like China and Russia is a strategic priority. Naval deployments near Venezuela serve as both a deterrent and a reminder that America can enforce sanctions and prevent illicit trade. For American audiences, This connects the abstract notion of naval power with tangible concerns like energy security, economic stability, and protection from adversaries who seek to undermine the United States. In the end, the standoff between Venezuela and U.S. Navy destroyers is less about the possibility of open war and more about the projection of power, the preservation of influence, and the defense of principles that matter deeply to American identity. It is about showing that the United States will not be intimidated, that its navy remains second to none, and that freedom of navigation and regional security are not negotiable. It is about reminding Americans that even in a complex world, the sight of a destroyer on the horizon still symbolizes strength, resolve, and the enduring commitment to safeguard American interests. As long as Venezuela continues to defy Washington and align itself with America's adversaries, the presence of U.S. Navy destroyers in the Caribbean will remain a fact of life. For Venezuelans, it will be seen as provocation. For the Maduro government, it will be spun as evidence of imperial aggression. But for Americans, it will serve as reassurance that their navy stands ready, that their country still commands respect, and that the seas remain secure under the watchful eye of destroyers armed with the most advanced weapons and guided by the proud traditions of freedom and strength. The story of Venezuela and the U.S. Navy is therefore not just a regional dispute but a chapter in the ongoing narrative of American power, a narrative that continues to inspire confidence at home and caution abroad.